Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Sean.
Can everyone hear me? Hello.
Yep. Hey, Sean.
You got double shot. You got
I know. Here we go. I'm going to turn the other one off.
Hi, everybody.
Oh.
We're not on, right?
I'm going to try to get everyone set up in peace.
Hey, Sean, are you the meeting master?
Well, I'm the technology guy, which I'm not actually the technology guy. I do my best in a pinch.
Oh, there's Dr.
Can
Finley.
I just share my screen just to make sure that's working?
Yeah, go for it.
All right.
Oops. Mute that one real quick.
Hi, kids.
Hi.
Hello.
Oh, you know what? I might have already had a screen share going, so let me stop the screen share and then let you try it again there.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say I got that error message.
Yay.
What are you doing?
Me?
Perfect.
That
There you
working?
go.
Works.
That
All right.
works.
Excellent.
Well, welcome everybody. We'll wait a couple minutes and see if we get some more signing on here.
Hi, Renee. I see you.
Hi, Shawnee. We're eating. I didn't want to be
Okay.
rude.
I have a funny story about that. We were doing a Zoom karaoke with a bunch of people from Windermere. It was Randy and Brianne and I and a few others. And my mom joined it and didn't realize that she could be seen. So she was eating dinner the entire time we were doing karaoke, not knowing we were watching her eat dinner. Whoops.
You have to be careful. Hi,
There was
Yeah.
a guy on the news that didn't have his pants on and the camera was catching that and he wasn't aware of it when he was doing his skirt.
This is probably a good time to remind everyone that we are recording this and it is also live on the internet.
In the education world, the one went around about the young girl who went to the bathroom with her,
Uh-oh.
with carrying her laptop with her, and everybody saw a little more than they wanted to.
Wait, are we supposed to wear pants?
Yeah.
No, it's called the Zoom mullet. You look good in front and the rest doesn't matter.
Somebody tell Dave Miles. I want to be sure he's got his pants on.
Hey, Mike. Mike,
Yeah.
I was talking to Sean yesterday and he said you were just a rock star and helping him get his stuff done for his loans and stuff.
Your brother went from the lowest low to the highest high yesterday. It was
Yeah.
great.
Yeah,
Yay.
you're a rock star.
I was glad to help him, Carrie. I told him, I said, well, if your bank is screwing around, SBA is going to run out of money and you're going to be sitting there with nothing. So
Yep. So,
we jammed a loan through for him and it worked out.
yep.
What are you eating?
I'm having teriyaki.
Hey, Mike, we are too.
See you.
Yeah, there you go.
Hey, Renee, by the way, you can move.
Hello. Hi, Joseph.
Renee, where's the fancy background this week?
I'm eating.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to commence the meeting. Call the meeting to order and nice to see everybody. Lyle, you and PJ, nice to see you. Welcome, Bill Finley. I see you in there somewhere.
Yeah, Bill Lewis here.
And
Thought
Bill,
you'd forgotten
nice to have
me.
you. Cindy, nice to have you. Rachel. And 1st of May already. Can you believe it? Holy cow. It's crazy. I know we're going to do Happy Bucks, but I want to have the first announcement. My mother is 98, my dad is 99, and they're having their 73rd wedding anniversary today. 73 years. That's a long time. So I asked my mom, when I called him this morning, I said, so would you marry him all over again? And she goes, God, no. She says, I'd want a few more choices. Anyway,
She still has a
What?
sense of humor.
Am I being heard?
What's that?
It's Bill.
Hi, Bill.
I'll tell you what, you never want to leave your spouse for another person because the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know.
Yeah. Well, they're so funny. As soon as one is at the hospital or anything else, they're even now they're instantly worried about them. So I think we'll proceed. And Mr. Prosh has thought for the day. Rob, do you want to share that with us?
No.
Okay.
So
you gotta love an enthusiastic club.
Well, so I've been thinking a lot about kind of the fellowship that we have in Rotary, and when Mike asked me a couple of days ago if I would do the thought of the day today, I of course, hopped on that wonderful internet and typed in fellowship, and a couple of things came up that I thought were very pertinent to us. So Brian S. Woods from the Codex Vellum 3 says, even upon the waters of trial and tribulation, by building the ships of kinship, fellowship, leadership, and mentorship, we become unsinkable.
I like that.
Good.
Thanks, Rob. That's good stuff.
Good.
Let's introduce, Bill Finley is here. Bill is an ER doctor in Everett, and he is our speaker today. So we want to welcome him and thank you for joining us. Do we have any other guests or Rotarians from outside the area?
Hey, Mike.
Today?
Mike, not that I'm taking offense, but maybe
Yeah.
I am. I'm actually a surgeon. So.
Oh, like I said, Bill Finley is an ER surgeon who's from Everett, who's with us today. Sorry about that, Bill.
Hey, Bill. In England, they always refer to a surgeon as Mr.
Yes.
Did you know that?
I did. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I prefer, personally, I just prefer Bill. Dr. Finley's my father, frankly.
Yeah, that's kind of, I'm with you, Bill. Do we have any other guests or Rotarians outside the area that are with us today? If not, I'll go to announcements. If you have not, again, I want to put the order out. If you owe on dues for third or fourth quarter, we really should have these cleaned up by now. So please, please, please catch up with Terry Stefanik and get those paid. Again, it keeps the club going and everything else. This has been a very, very unusual year, as we all know. So everybody gets a bit of a mulligan, but we still have bills to pay and stuff to do. So please get your dues caught up and paid if you have not. I would like to request that.
Mike, how do we know if we owe?
Terry could tell you, Joe. Just send her an email and she'll double check. So if you could take care of that, that would be good. Kendall, are you or Lori on today? Either. I was going to have them just
I'm on,
update.
Mike.
Lori, you here?
Yep.
Okay. Do you want to kind of give us an update on scholarships?
Sure. We're just about to the point where we're ready to announce our scholarship recipients. So we should know by Wednesday, I think, as our deadline next week. So at our next meeting, I will give you an update.
And how many are you guessing scholarships will we end up doing, Laura?
I think about between 16 and 20.
Okay. That's
Yeah.
super. Yeah. And thanks, Lori. Thanks for all your hard work on that.
Oh, sure. No problem.
Appreciate it. Any other announcements for the good of the order? Ellen, loving seeing you every week. This is great. Rachel, you got an announcement? Oh, you're just waving?
No,
Hey.
I was just saying hi to Ellen.
Okay.
Hey, Mike, I do.
Hi. I was muted, so hi.
Hi, okay.
Mike.
Sharon, go.
Yeah.
You're good.
So you can pay your dues on the website. I just wanted to remind people of that.
Okay.
And hi, Ellie.
The other thing we could do is it's a good point. Like Joe said, if you're not sure, we'll have Terry, just contact Terry and she'll let you know kind of where you stand. Because, it's been a challenge to keep up on all this stuff, with the pandemic going on, and as we all know. So if no other announcements, then let's go through kind of quickly for Happy Bucks. I promised Bill that we would get him on by 12:25. So maybe
Ross has a quick question first.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sharon, I still owe $100 for some cruise tickets for the chance for the cruise and the auction. Can I pay that on the website?
I don't know if you can or not, and I can also take credit cards on our old Square that you hook to the phone. So
okay.
let me you say you do owe $100?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Maybe
so
Ross.
I can take the payment over if you want to call me.
should I mail a check into the box?
You could do that too, to the PO box.
Right. Okay.
Ross.
do that.
Okay.
Ross, if you'd please make sure down in the memo to put what it's for, because Julie Linhart will process those. And so that she knows what it's for, that would be a good thing.
Because I got to send the stubs in too,
Correct.
I'm assuming. Doesn't do
Yes.
any good if I just pay it and not send in stubs.
Well, and
That is true.
Rob, do we have resolution on what we're doing with those yet, as far as overall?
Well, at this point, a couple of things have been floated around. Holland America Cruises has said that it's fine for us to do this next year if we want to do that, or if we want to shorten the timeline and do it this year, that would be fine too. We're still kind of determining whether we want to do an online auction at this point with what we have received by way of procurement. And if we did that, we would probably tie the current cruise raffle tickets into that. But it's not a good time for the cruise lines by any means.
Since none of them are cruising, yeah.
As well as there are people trapped still on ships. So yeah, I can't imagine people really want to buy cruise tickets at this point. So that's where we thought maybe next year might be a better way for us to approach it.
You would have the ship all to yourself. That would be good.
So
I
if
like
that's
flying
the
on an
case-
airplane right now.
Yeah.
If that's the case, wouldn't we just, why would Ross pay if we're not going to use them right now?
That is also the case. However, anything that we can do to help you for this next year would definitely be a good thing.
Yeah. Besides, next year I might not be good for it.
Yeah. Let's get him while he's got money. You never know. Okay, let's go around. Sean, I'll turn it over to you for Happy Bucks. If we could ask people just to move quickly through, just want to be sure
Definitely.
Dr. Bill has time.
You bet. I'm going to unmute everybody so you can either raise your hand or try to interject. And as we go through the meeting, if for some reason you've got some background noise going on, I can actually see it. So I'm going to be muting people. So if you do have something to say, like raise your hand or just let me know that I accidentally muted you when I shouldn't. So I'm trying to run this as best as possible. So anybody want to
Sean,
start
since I'm
off?
on the phone, will you just let me know when you want me to talk, and then I'll speak when you want me to.
Why don't you go right now, man?
Oh, go right now? Okay, I have happy dollars that you know, I have the best tenants in the world. That's all I got to say. They're fantastic, and I'm really happy and pleased with my tenants. And also, there's a piece of property that I have out of state that looks like it's going to get sold, which is a good thing. So I'm happy about that.
Excellent. Who else? Anybody else want to step up and let us know what they're happy about today?
Gary.
Everyone all at once?
I got my hand up.
Okay.
Oh, I can only see so many of you at once, so feel free to speak up as well.
I'll go. This is Carrie.
Go for it, Carrie.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm actually at home alone right now. Brent had to run up to the building and mail some stuff to teachers. And this is the first time I've been alone in my house in 7 weeks. So I'm really happy about that. It's like, I don't know what to do with myself. But yeah, things are going good around here. My dad's still being a rock star and he's healthy. And now that Sean got Mike's help, he's doing a lot better today too. So things are good.
Excellent. I just threw up on the little chat thread that you'll see on the side of your screen, the link that you can go to if you want to donate some dollars to Happy Bucks as well. All right, who's up next? Gary Kenner, I see you over there.
Yeah. So I gave, rather than do it every week, I gave my Happy Bucks for the rest of the year, I guess. Anyway, I can get done with it. But I want to.
That $1.50 will really help us out, Gary.
Well, no, it's a high two figures. So. Well, I wished I could give a shout out to I've got 11 commercial clients. I'm a landlord for 11 different companies. And I've been worried. I tend to worry anyway. That's my downfall, but it's been going so well. And I've been working with them and only one has had a big problem so far. And so I just really admire their attitude about it. And they've been really good with me and I've been good with them. And so far, so good. I mean, I've only had one that needed, a lot of modification thing. And so I don't know when this is going to peak out for landlords, but so far so good. And I'm really happy about that. I'm going to worry a little less this weekend.
Nice.
Good to hear.
Hey, Sean,
Yeah.
I'm ready.
Let's go, Lyle. I see PJ next to you too. Hi, PJ.
PJ's got a cap on because I'm making her work outside and she's kind of all icky.
I thought maybe you gave her a haircut.
She wants to give me a haircut and I'm afraid to sleep. So I wake up with a different hairdo. Well, couple things. I don't want this to be a downer, but I'm come June 29th, I'll no longer be with the city. I'm a casualty of budget constraints. So, and you heard about those last week from Cassie. So I guess on the 29th of June, I'm going to be retired. So that's a good thing. And then the other thing is on June 30th, PJ and I will be getting on a plane to go to our house in Arizona. And we don't know when we'll be back again. So we'll be doing what Ellen does here as far as zooming into you guys. So those are my happy bucks.
Yeah, it's kind of a good news, bad news thing, Lyle.
Yeah. Look how happy PJ looks. PJ's like super happy.
Well, it's a lot of work, let me tell you.
Hey, Sean, I want to just say one quick thing, Carrie. The thing I enjoyed most about your brother yesterday, getting the loan stuff squared away for him. I told Sean, as I said, for all that you do for everybody else, I said, once in a while, it's kind of nice for somebody to return the favor. And because he was a happy camper and it was neat to see. He's a good man.
Yeah, that's great.
Totally. Who do we got up next? Are you raising your hand, Gil, or are you just trying to adjust your phone? Oh,
They can't hear me at all because I called in. They're all on Zoom.
is that you, Julie?
Hi, Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear
Yes.
you. What are you happy about today, darling?
Well, I didn't know everybody could even, I'm on the phone, so I don't have my Zoom in here. So I'm just saying hi to everybody.
Nice to have you, Julie.
Good to hear from you.
Good.
I'll be muting you now.
You have been muted.
All right, who's up next? Deb.
I'll go. My happy bucks go for Mike too. Mike really encouraged me to do the second round for PPP, and he was very helpful. So thanks, Mike.
You're welcome, Debbie. Glad to do it.
I hope Coastal Community Bank is helping you out with your happy bucks today, Mike.
For those who haven't heard, apparently your
That's-
banker makes all the difference on how that process goes. So
Totally.
kudos to
We've
Coastal.
done like 2,000 of these loans, so it's got
Wow.
crazy, but it's nice to help people who need it.
That's incredible. Cool. Oh, I see Renee and Dave. What are you guys
Yeah.
happy about today?
Well, a couple things. One, we're very, very pleased to have Jordan Porbeck in our home, and she's working really, really hard at the hospital and kind of keeping things rocking and rolling at ER. So we're really proud of her. She's doing a great job. And the other thing is ER Providence. And so Lyle, I think that's great news. And I know your bride is thrilled. So we want to go with you. So that's my happy back. David?
No, that covers it.
We're all good.
Nice. Well, good to see you both. I saw Kendall with her hand politely raised.
I am unmuting myself. I have a happy shout out. I am not sure if Sean O'Donnell is on the line or not, but Sean has apparently teamed with our Rotaractors. And so the Rotaractors are bringing him a little business, and then he's bringing out a percentage that they're going to use for some of their charity projects. And, you know, there's a ton of them they're thinking about right now. So I just thought that was amazing how we all connected, and everybody's winning. Like, it's a win-win for everybody in the community. And then I also wanted to shout out to my kid, Lily, who's, as some of you may not know, has dyslexia, and she's been forced in this online learning and in her RN program, which has been a living nightmare for her because it's her kind of worst way to learn. And her two finals that she thought was really scared she could potentially fail. And if you get fails, like you know, you can get thrown out of the program, so it's a big deal. She's passed. Yay,
Nice.
jazz hands.
Yay.
So yeah, we got good news this week, so it's all good.
That's awesome. Good stuff. Who else we want to get on there? Ross.
Hey, so a couple of happy bucks. The bees are doing fantastic, and the pumpkins are the opposite. All my seeds, none of them germinated, so I'm gonna have to go to Plan B, try to get some more seeds from out of state. But that's the way it goes.
Very cool. Anyone else out there flipping to the
Darren
second
Clace,
screen?
what's going on with you, buddy?
Hey, Mike, just happy.
That's it?
That's it.
Okay.
Man, a few words.
Yeah. Yeah, but he knows what he is.
Hey, this is Cindy Morrison. I'll speak up real quick.
Sure.
I just took a beautiful bike ride to my daughter's house this morning, and as soon as Rotary is over, I'm going out in my yard the entire rest of the day. And to me, that's the best day possible.
Good for you.
Yeah, happy about that.
Pastor David, nice to see you.
I was going to say David's next.
Yeah, hello everyone. Haven't been with you for a few weeks as we've gone online. Being a pastor in a pandemic is a wild ride, and we've been figuring that out, kind of having a virtual congregation, trying to keep everyone connected and caring for people. And we have lost one member from COVID-19 and had a number, 5 or 6, get sick and get better. So all that stuff's happening. One of the things I missed though was my 55th birthday. So I owe some some birthday bucks, which as soon as I figure out that link that's on the chat thing, I will pay up on that. So
happy birthday, or post happy birthday.
Thank you.
Nice to have you. Anybody else?
Joe Marine.
Yeah, I just want to say, I don't know how you guys are handling this, but as an introvert, I really enjoy, being by myself.
That'll be the day.
Yeah. No, it is good. I think a lot of us are getting things done. The honey-do list is getting shorter, right? Or now I think she's just making up stuff now. Now I don't know why I'm painting the neighbor's house. I don't get that. But anyway, this is really good that we're able to still kind of see each other's face and stay together. Yeah. When we finally do get back together to regular meeting, it'll be like we were never apart.
Hey, Joe, you better be careful what you say because I'm sitting in Candy's office right now. So
yeah, I know. She just texted me. That's why I said that.
I was going to say that the sun's out and the guns are out, so you must be doing some yard work or something too.
Candy's probably got her pad out and she's writing new things down right now, Sheila.
Yeah. I am doing, when I'm done with this, I'll go back to doing yard work, but I just got a little workout. I try to work out a little bit every day while we're stuck inside.
Hey, get my doorknobs on.
Candy says get her doorknobs on, Joe.
Here it comes, Joe.
It never ends.
Okay, anybody else before we have Rachel introduce our guest? All right, Rachel, you
Dave Biles.
Introduce Dr. Bill and we'll move forward with our speaker.
All right, Dave, do you want to go?
Sean, I just wanted to say that you kind of violated the prime directive because you unmuted Joe Marine's microphone. Yes, never do that. Just kidding, Joe. Don't hold a grudge.
Hey, Sean.
Always good for a joke.
Would you mind giving me permission to record?
Of course, yeah, definitely. In fact, would you like? I'm already live streaming it. If you want me to send you the link, or did you want to record it yourself?
I was gonna record it myself, just thinking with the internet connectivity, it might be a little challenging.
Yeah, I'm just gonna make you the host, so you can do whatever you want.
Wow, what power!
There you go.
That's a little.
The power is
scary.
yours.
Rachel, why don't you introduce Dr. Bill and we'll move forward.
Okay. Hey, sorry, I've been kind of in and out because I got a plumber here working on my house, so everything's great. But I'm happy to introduce Dr. Bill Finley. He attended the University of Washington School of Medicine, and he's trained as a surgical oncologist in Pennsylvania. After a few years there and in New York, he and his family moved back to Everett in 2003. In 2008, he started the Trauma Emergency General Surgery team at Providence. He currently works with Synergy Surgicalists as their national director for acute care and general surgery, and he works clinically for them at St. Joseph's Medical Center in Bellingham. He also still works in the medical ICU at Providence for Western Washington Medical Group. He's recently joined the Downtown Everett Rotary Club. He's been married to his wife, Katie, for 29 years, and they have 2 adult children, Haley and Nick. So thank you for being here with us.
Oh, that hurt my hip.
Hey, Bill, I'm going to interrupt you real quickly just to mention that when I gave you host capabilities, that took away my capability to mute everyone. So if I could remind everyone that's not speaking right now, please go to the little mute button should be on the lower left-hand screen, and just click that to mute yourself so we can make sure we can hear Dr. Finley's presentation. Excuse me, Surgeon Finley's presentation.
Oh, no, that's perfect. Hang on just a second. You can see my screen.
And you can also probably just mute everyone yourself now that I think about it.
Yeah, that's true. I have the power. Let's see. Not sure how to do that, but let's see. Oh, okay. Well, we'll just.
If you go to participants, you should be able to click the little button that says mute all.
Okay. Well, here we go. So thanks, Rachel, for that great introduction. When I gave this talk 3 weeks ago at the Everett Rotary, there are a lot of horrible stories coming out of our metropolitan areas across the country. It still remains a scary time. And we still are hearing, some awful stories from New York City, Detroit, Chicago, and New Orleans. They've all abated, but we're still also hearing those stories about patients dying by themselves, with families not able to visit. So it's really kind of a really horrible situation. But I think that there has been some light at the end of the tunnel, and we're starting to see some improvement. And I hope this provides you with some reassurance. And obviously, I'm stealing my own punchline a little bit, but what we're doing seems to be working. So this is an audio-visual presentation. So for those of you who are missing the visual part, I am recording this, and I'll get it posted on the Everett Rotary homepage, which is where my talk from a few weeks ago is also posted. And for some of you that might have viewed that video, there's going to be some repetition here, but there's also some new stuff at the end. So talking about our relationship with infectious disease, influenza, this is what I'm gonna be talking about. So we'll talk about our history with a relationship with infectious disease. I'm gonna use influenza as an example. And then we'll also talk a little bit about some current terms that we use in epidemiology and public health. We'll talk about the current situation, and then finally finish up with future directions. So infectious disease has been with us for a very long time. We have archaeological evidence of major epidemics as early as the 3rd millennium BC. The bubonic plague caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, carried by fleas on rats, caused a great deal of chaos over the 1,000 years. The Black Plague of the 14th century led to societal change. We're seeing societal change now into the feudal system, serfdom, spurning technological innovation due to the loss of cheap labor. The Americas have also been decimated by multiple times by various diseases. It's estimated that up to 90% of the native population in the Americas was decimated by multiple diseases for which they had no immunity in the 16th and 17th centuries. And we also have modern epidemics, Ebola, HIV, Zika virus, all causing significant death and morbidity. Influenza has been a big killer. There have been multiple epidemics throughout the last 150 years. Big ones in 1889, the big flu pandemic, the Spanish flu pandemic in 1918, 1957, and most recently, the H1N1 or swine flu outbreak from 2009, which interestingly had less impact on the elderly than previous outbreaks, thought to be due to previous exposure and immunity, which we'll talk a little bit about. And infectious diseases also actually define who we are. Genetic studies have demonstrated that we actually have viral RNA and DNA within our genome. So not only are we part Neanderthal, which probably explains a lot of some of our own behaviors, but we're also part virus. And up to 88% has viral origins. So just like being part Neanderthal explains many of our traits and more likely our family members and friends, but perhaps we're a little bit more viral because of it too. So before I talk about coronavirus and COVID-19, I want to talk about influenza. It's something that we endure every year. We even have a season for it every year that we celebrate in various ways. And then comparing COVID-19 to influenza also helps us put it into perspective as well. There's a lot of ongoing discussion whether COVID-19 is or is not like the flu. So what is the flu? So according to the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, flu is a contagious respiratory virus that infects the nose, throat, and sometimes the lungs. It can cause mild to severe illness and at times can lead to death. This is what the virus looks like. Inside is the RNA, or the ribonucleic acid, this yellow spaghetti string. And this is really the recipe. They're not really blueprints, but they're a recipe for how the virus makes more copies of itself. And the goal of the virus is to replicate itself. And it does that by invading a host, us, and making more copies, hijacking the cellular machinery. The RNA is encased in this purple casing on the outside, which is made up of fats and lipids, and it's coated with various proteins. That's what all these little spiky things are on the outside. So the fatty layer is why soap works so well at stopping the virus. It breaks up fat, and the RNA inside is no match for water, and it's destroyed. It has really essentially zero shelf life out of the protective membrane. So influenza viruses have been around for a really long time. It generally infects about 3 to 11% of our population every year. The time of onset from exposure to symptoms is about 1 to 4 days, and generally it lasts about a week. The mortality rate varies a little bit from season to season, and it's usually around 0.1%. And generally the season is usually in the winter months. We have vaccinations for it. The virus has variations, which is why the vaccine changes every year. So the type A, B, C, and D are the influenza types we talk about. Types A and B infect humans. And there's also different proteins that are on the outside of the virus. That's why we get the different H type and N type. And it has a high mutation rate, which is why it changes every year. And that's why they have to reinvent the vaccine. And also sometimes why the vaccine is not necessarily always effective. And it causes epidemics and pandemics. So what's the difference between an epidemic and a pandemic? Currently we have a pandemic. So an epidemic is an outbreak of a disease that spreads quickly and affects many individuals in a localized area. And so back in December, Wuhan, China had an epidemic of COVID-19. A pandemic is an epidemic that's essentially spread across the world. And eventually the WHO declared COVID-19 a pandemic. So influenza is spread from person to person via respiratory droplets and aerosols. When we breathe, cough, talk, sneeze, we expel moisture in the form of aerosols and droplets. These droplets can settle on surfaces, people, objects, etc. So what's the difference between a droplet and an aerosol? A droplet is a little collection of moisture that's greater than 5 micrometers. As such, it can only travel a short distance. So 1 to 2 meters, which is why we talk about the 6 feet of separation. Gravity pulls it down, they dissipate quickly, and they are produced generally when we cough and sneeze, not when we talk. But they can land everywhere. Our hands, our counters, our smartphones. We then put them on doorknobs, latches, locks. So it kind of makes us rethink the whole handshaking thing. Aerosol, on the other hand, are collections of moisture less than 5 micrometers. They can remain airborne longer. They do desiccate quickly, especially in a dry environment. So Arizona, they desiccate very quickly, so probably helping with the spread. And they're also released when coughing and sneezing as well, but they also are released when we talk. So what happens when it spreads? We touch a surface with viruses on it. Your kitchen counter, a keypad at the grocery store, a doorknob. We then touch our face. We all heard about how much we touch our face. The virus then enters through our mucous membranes, mouth, nose, ears, and infects the host. And unless the host has immunity, the virus starts its dirty business of replicating itself by invading the host, and illness ensues. Now, viruses have something that's called a basic reproductive rate. And the basic reproductive rate of influenza is 1.5. So what is a R0 or basic reproductive rate? So this defines on average how many additional infections an infected host passes on the virus and infects others. So it's a measure of how infectious and communicable disease is. For example, the flu is 1.5. Measles is between 12 and 18, so incredibly infectious. And really, herd immunity is what helps lower that basic rate. So for example, measles now is much lower because a lot of people have herd immunity. So what is herd immunity? Herd immunity protects a community from infectious diseases by virtue of the sheer numbers of people immune to such diseases. So we hear about this a lot with vaccinations and the anti-vaccination crowd. So let's take a look at this. What does this mean graphically? So here's a situation where nobody has immunity. So we've got the little blue guys who are not immunized but healthy. We have people that are immunized that are yellow. We don't see any yellow people here. And then the red figures are not immunized, sick, and contagious. So no one has immunity. This disease spreads very quickly. And this is the current situation that we have with coronavirus. Now, here you have a few people that are immune. So there's a few of the yellow figures that are dispersed throughout the crowd. So the disease still spreads, but there's a few people that are protected. So that helps. And oops, let me go back. And then here is a population which has sufficient immunity. So either they've been vaccinated or people have had the disease. So you've got every one of the sick surrounded by yellow individuals. And so consequently, the blue individuals, the blue figures, are protected. So for example, in measles, we have a very high percentage of people that are vaccinated against measles. Number of people that are not vaccinated and they're blue. And so consequently, those people are protected though because of the herd immunity. So there's two ways to achieve herd immunity. The first is to vaccinate. And so measles, great example. We have a sufficient percentage of our population that is to prevent it from happening. We have had some outbreaks of measles, and that's why we see these outbreaks, because there's unimmunized people who are not immune. The other way is through enduring the illness and developing immunity as part of that process. So the flu epidemic that I talked about from 2009 is an example where the elderly were thought to have been spared due to some previous exposure in their childhood or youth. So the other thing is that we can also protect ourselves. And so this is a lot of the public health initiative that we've been hearing about. Washing our hands, we discussed how that kills the virus, keeping our hands away from our face, prevents it from being spread, cleaning and disinfecting surfaces, decreasing aerosols and droplets by covering our coughs, doing the vampire cough. And then the biggest thing is if you feel sick, stay home. And this is probably one of the worst things that we as Americans do. We go to work because we have to. And hopefully it's something that's going to change. So let's switch gears now and talk about COVID-19. So what is a coronavirus? So like influenza, this is a family of related viruses. The family has been known for at least 50 years and has likely been with humans for many generations. They mostly affect animals, but there are 7 known coronavirus types that infect and cause disease in humans. 4 of them cause a very mild cold-like illness. But the other 3, I'm sorry, can cause more severe illnesses. So recently in history, there have been some coronaviruses that developed mutations in their animal hosts and crossed over into mammals and then crossed over into people. So the severe acute respiratory virus, or SARS, is believed to have originated in bats and possibly a type of wild cat, a civet cat. There's also the Middle Eastern respiratory virus, or MERS, and this has been found in camels. So stay away from camels. So COVID-19 is the latest addition to that, the coronavirus. And it causes, the actual virus is called SARS-CoV-2, which causes the disease syndrome. COVID-19, which is what everyone refers to this as, is really the disease. And it's named COVID because it's coronavirus disease, and 19 because it was identified in 2019. So it's believed that this virus originated in bats and was also found in pangolins. And I don't know about you, but I have no idea what a pangolin was. I get bats, that one I understand, but pangolins I wasn't so sure about. So this is a pangolin. And it's important not to blame the pangolins or the bats or the camels or the civet cats for that matter. We very likely harbor viruses that can also infect them, and it goes the other direction. So it's important, my public service announcement for animal viruses. So here's what the coronavirus looks like. So it looks very similar to our influenza virus. It contains RNA, the yellow spaghetti-like stuff inside. It's got a fatty lipid layer around it, and it's got proteins that spike the surface. This virus is also destroyed by SARS. So the virus causes a disease called COVID-19. The estimated mortality rate, so those who get it, how many die, is anywhere between 1 and 3.4%. We really don't know the mortality rate until we get more information. And if you look at our current data, raw data, so you divide the number of deaths attributed to coronavirus in the United States, it's divided by the number who have it, it's about 5.8%. So that's kind of the raw number. But we really don't know because we don't know what the real true prevalence is. And we'll talk about prevalence in a little bit. So we'll need more information. It's much more challenging to determine how many people have the virus because most people have mild cases. They never come to medical attention, let alone any testing. There is a delay of about 4 to 5 days before symptoms start, and the disease lasts up to 2 weeks. Symptoms range from asymptomatic to rapid and severe respiratory decompensation, multi-system organ failure, and indeed death. Now, as of now, there's not a real clear understanding of the disease process. We don't know why some have no symptoms while others die. Currently, there's no known treatment. We'll talk a little bit about that. There are some clinical trials ongoing for antiviral medications, as well as other medications, but we don't know if they're helpful in treatment. So let's compare what we know about influenza with what we know about the coronavirus. So the basic reproductive rate of influenza is 1.5. For the coronavirus, it's not known, but preliminary studies suggest that it's anywhere between 1.4 and 3.8. So it seems to be more contagious. Onset of symptoms, 4.5 days to 4.5 days, pretty similar. Infectious period. So a patient with influenza is typically infectious, in other words, can share it with someone else, from the day prior to the onset of symptoms up to about 10 days after the onset of symptoms. So for coronavirus, it goes from anywhere to -4 days or maybe even further to, quite frankly, we don't know. And there have been cases in China and elsewhere now of individuals testing positive more than once. This is obviously disturbing. And the duration of symptoms, influenza usually lasts about a week, 2 weeks for COVID-19. So what about mortality? So right now, what we think is mortality for influenza, we know this one is about 0.1%. So every year with the seasonal flu, we estimate that 0.1% of people who develop influenza have a complication and die of it. For COVID-19, that's somewhere between 1.4 and 3.4%. Do we have a vaccine? Influenza, yes, we do. COVID-19, no, we don't. Is there herd immunity present? There is some, and it slows the disease for influenza. However, there is zero herd immunity for what we understand for coronavirus. And influenza does have some treatments. Tamiflu has shortened the course of disease. There's not any current specific treatment for COVID-19 that is known to be beneficial at this point. So I want to talk about Iceland just for a brief period of time. So it's the smallest country in the European Union. It's an island in the middle of the North Atlantic, 360,000 people, 1,500 cases of COVID. They have now randomly tested about 6% of their population. They had both targeted testing, so high-risk people, but they also tested asymptomatic people, low risk. Randomly tested citizens, 43% who tested positive had no symptoms. That's pretty impressive. So 43% of people who were found to have the virus had no symptoms. We don't have any follow-up on that study yet. Iceland did initiate aggressive isolation and contact tracing, and we'll talk about contact tracing in a little bit, and have managed to keep their numbers down. Since early April, when this was first reported, Iceland, with a population of 360,000, have added only another 100 cases of COVID-19. So we have a problem. We have a disease for which no vaccination, no herd immunity, is possibly 30 times more lethal than influenza, has higher rates of transmission, can be transmitted 4 times longer when we're asymptomatic, and we may have as many as 50% of people carrying it asymptomatically. These are the makings of a public health disaster. So this is why it's a big deal, and this is why it was a big deal and it still remains a big deal. This is the so-called flat curve. Without spreading out the curve, COVID-19 cases could overwhelm the healthcare system. We saw shortages in beds, ventilators, protective PPE, especially personal protective equipment. And it not only has direct consequences from COVID-19, but also indirect consequences as well. So what happens to your victim of trauma, heart attack, stroke, surgical emergency patients in an overwhelmed hospital? So this results in additional indirect deaths. And again, we'll talk a little bit about that later too. So if the same percentage of us had in a bad flu season in the United States were infected with COVID-19, about 15% require hospitalization, 4% require ICU admission. So this is for influenza. This is for COVID-19. So 50% required hospitalization and 4% required ICU admission. And this would result in 1.3 million deaths. So this is a normal, normal influenza numbers based upon the number of COVID cases. So we had just as many COVID cases, we would need that many hospitalizations, that many ICU stays, and would result in that many deaths. So this is over one season. So let's go back and make a comparison with influenza. So these are the CDC estimates for a bad flu season. So you have 56 million people with the flu, 740,000 of them require hospitalization, ICU 185,000, and result in 62,000 deaths. This would be the same numbers for COVID based upon the numbers that they were looking at. And keep in mind that there are about 924,000 hospital beds in the entire United States. Of those, 107,000 are ICU beds. So obviously, if this was under a short period of time, it could very much overwhelm the system. And this is a hypothetical worst case scenario that public health officials were looking at when this first started emerging. Fortunately, though, we're not helpless. And these dire predictions that were looked at have not come to pass because we've actually implemented some of these tools. So let's talk about the public health tools that we do have. The first are personal, and you can use to decrease our chances of becoming ill and spreading illness to others. And we've already talked about these. Wash your hands, keep your hands away from your face, clean and disinfect, cover your cough, and stay home if you're sick. But really the idea is don't spread it to others. Beyond the personal are the public tools. So first and foremost is education, to educate about those personal tools. We can socially distance ourselves, which is what we've done. We can spread out the herd and thereby decrease rates of spread. We can survey, which means testing, and more testing, which is also something we've heard a lot about. And we can also do something called contact tracing and ultimately isolate with the virus until it's run its course. Ultimately, the goal is herd immunity through immunization and natural disease immunity. Public policy, including budgeting, resource allocation, guidelines, advisories, mandates, can all help mitigate and flatten the curve. They may also include travel restrictions, rigorous health screenings, and ultimately quarantining and isolating people that have it. So just a little mental exercise here. When this first happened, if every single one of us were able to socially isolate ourselves and place ourselves in quarantine, this disease would have been gone in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. But unfortunately, in our modern society, that's impossible without severe societal consequences. So what is social distancing? So social distancing puts space between us to slow down the virus. What this means is stay home, avoid public gatherings, and for many of us, this also means staying away from family members that are not part of your household. Social distancing puts space between us to slow down the virus. And if 50% of us are asymptomatic and shedding virus, we should cover our face when we're unable to maintain social distancing, which means wearing a mask in the grocery store, as awkward as it feels. And although a cloth mask doesn't probably necessarily protect you from getting coronavirus, it may prevent you from spreading it to others. And the number of people that I see in grocery stores not wearing masks is kind of disturbing to me. And in fact, when I first put on a mask, it was very awkward. But really, that should be one of the things that we should be doing, is that when we're out in public and we can't avoid being 6 feet away from people, we should cover our mouths. So surveillance. So the goals of surveillance are identify the extent of disease. So in order to test for the virus, and this has actually changed a little bit now, but initially, I don't know if anyone's had this, but they shove this swab into your nose and they feel like you're biopsying your brain. And initially, these results took long, agonizing days. I mean, literally 7 to 9 days. We were having to put patients in isolation for that long of time. And now it takes minutes. And we have a point of care test now in the hospital that can give a result in essentially 20 minutes. So this improvement has just had a huge impact on decreasing the demand on personal protective equipment or PPE in the hospital. And so we can move patients from isolation and into a non-isolation room. And so it's really made a big difference. Despite the efforts and the rhetoric that we're hearing, testing still is a problem. And there's still shortages of testing. Now, these tests for the virus are what are called antigen tests. So really, essentially what that does is it determines whether or not somebody has the virus at that time. Now, the other type of testing, which is also very limited, is a blood antibody test, or what's called serotyping. So when we have COVID-19, we're infected with the virus, regardless of whether or not we have symptoms, we develop antibodies that are part of our immune system, and these are in the blood. Initially, we develop an immunoglobulin or antibody, M or IgM. That happens in the early phase. And later, we develop an immunoglobulin G or IgG. The IgG, in many cases, confers long-term immunity, but it remains as a marker of exposure to the virus. So we can see how many people were exposed. Now, these antibodies can be tested in a blood test, and their presence is what is by seroconversion. Now, why these tests are important is that we can appropriately apply rules to these different populations. Those that are in the yellow, so in other words, they're at risk for getting the virus, would employ social distancing and those other measures. If you have COVID, then you would be under strict quarantine and isolation to prevent you from spreading it to others. You'd be treated with supportive care. And then once you've had the disease and you have an antibody test that confers immunity, then you just have standard precautions for those who are exposed and possibly immune, but we don't know, again, don't know that for certain. So why antibody testing is so important is it allows us to determine prevalence. Now, what's prevalence? Prevalence is the proportion of a particular population found to be affected by a medical condition at a specific time. Now, this is some early data looking at the prevalence of COVID-19. We still don't know how many people in the United States have actually been infected by coronavirus. Ongoing studies will help us understand this better. In the current case, our current numbers are represented by this little tiny blue bar. And at the last time I checked the Johns Hopkins website, it was about 1.1 million. But at the time of this production, this publication, there were about 800,000, or about 0.24% of the US population infected with coronavirus by positive testing. So the latest number is about almost 1.1 million. Now, based upon these three separate studies, and these were studies that were conducted by various research organizations looking at a couple of different areas. They looked at LA County and Santa Clara in California, and then there was a reader poll that also identified people that could be tested. So based upon these three studies, the incident of COVID-19 exposure may be anywhere from 3.8%, or 12.4 million of our fellow citizens, to 10.9%, or nearly 36 million people right now have been infected with the COVID-19. Let that sink in. So if there are that many people who have been exposed, what this will do is it will decrease the denominator of our mortality rate, which is good news. So remember, mortality rate is the deaths for a population over that population for that period of time. And this is from our middle school math. If we increase the denominator and leave the numerator the same, they will decrease the percentage. That will decrease mortality potentially 40 times over our current raw estimate. And the raw mortality right now is about 5.9%. So that would bring it down to about 0.1%, which, if we recall, that's about the same as we have for seasonal flu. However, we know that the numerator is also much likely higher. This is from the Yale School of Public Health and the Washington Post. They did a combined study. And in the month between early March and early April, there was a huge surge in the death rate. And that's represented by this orange spike. So there's a normal death rate that happens throughout the season, and there's some seasonal variation. So this was a big spike. Now, part of this was COVID-19. That's this lower, darker part. But the other part was also as large as the excessive deaths related to COVID-19. So we've had this huge spike in extra deaths. Were those caused by COVID-19? We don't know. Could be as much as twice as higher as what we were anticipating, which means the deaths in the United States right now could be over 100,000, perhaps 130,000. Are those due directly to COVID-19, or could they be indirectly due to COVID-19? So in other words, those issues that I talked about where someone has a heart attack and the hospital is overwhelmed. Now, you've heard about hospitals seeing decreased admissions. Now, there's no reason that heart attacks would go down, that strokes would go down, other than the fact that people are afraid to go to the hospital. So there's going to be some indirect mortality related to that as well. Now, we're not going to know these things until down the road and we can actually do those studies and determine it. So the other tool that we've got is what's called contact tracing. And so what this is good old-fashioned detective work. When someone tests positive, you go back and see all of their contacts. You can then be instructed to quarantine, examined, and tested as needed. Now, you can see how contact tracing goes. The red figures are the people who are infected. You go back and you look at all the black figures that they had contact with. You go back and talk to them, and you can imagine this creates just a huge problem. I mean, we're asymptomatic for 4 to 5 days. A huge logistical and manpower problem. So how do we do this? But the social distancing that we had in the stay-at-home orders decreased our contacts and helped tremendously. But what about when we start opening up our economies again and our daily lives? Well, perhaps you read about this in the news. Apple and Google have teamed up to build an app that would go on our smartphones. And the latest news that I saw was that it'll be out sometime later this month. So using Bluetooth, you would anonymously trade information with anyone you came in contact with via Bluetooth. So if someone invades your personal space. Now, if someone was diagnosed with COVID, theoretically, it could then be determined you came in contact with them previously. So you could then quarantine yourself and be tested to determine if you too are infected. Now, the latest update of this will be released supposedly on both Android and Apple devices with updates in mid-May. But obviously, it raises a lot of privacy concerns. And gosh, what a fun email that would be. So what about treatment? So we have all heard about the anti-malarial drugs chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine. And what about this other one that we just heard about, remdesivir? Well, so far, the FDA warned us against the use of chloroquine or hydroxychloroquine just a couple weeks ago. So outside of hospital settings and clinical trials, this drug should not be used. And so far, clinical trials that have been done really have not demonstrated any benefit. And in fact, a trial in Brazil was stopped that was using high-dose chloroquine due to fatal cardiac arrhythmia. So we were causing more harm than good. So the summary of all these clinical trials really suggests right now that there's no obvious benefit. You may have also heard about in the news just in the last couple of days, a drug called remdesivir. So remember the coronavirus creates copies of itself by replicating RNA. Remdesivir is an analog of the components of RNA. And when it gets incorporated into the RNA, it stops the replication process in its tracks. So the virus can't replicate and the virus dies. So they conducted a couple of clinical trials in this. One was in here in the United States. It was a placebo-controlled trial. So that means that there was a fake drug that was given. A little over 1,000 patients with COVID-19 who were hospitalized. So generally means that they had pretty severe symptoms. What they found is that the time to recovery was reduced from 15 days to 11 days. It demonstrates a 30% improvement. Sounds like a lot, but they also observed a small decrease in mortality from 11% to 8%. But it was not statistically significant. And then the paper out of China kind of really demonstrated no benefit. So both of these still need to go under peer review. They haven't been published yet. And certainly what it comes to is it's not a miracle cure, but it may have some benefit in decreasing duration of symptoms, not unlike Tamiflu, which we have for seasonal flu. And fortunately, remdesivir is very cheap to produce. Estimates are that it costs as little as $1 for Gilead to make a 10-day course. So currently, it is only available on patients on clinical trials, and really by definition, that means they're in the hospital. And the manufacturer right now is providing it free of charge. However, once it's approved, how much the charge for patients will be is unclear. So ultimately, the long-term goal is to develop herd immunity through either a vaccination or natural immunity. However, this is likely years away. There's suggestions of a vaccine in early 2021, but it entails its own set of logistics trying to vaccinate such a large population. I mean, it takes a long time to make 330 million doses of vaccine. That's just for this country. So finally, let's talk a little bit about what's happening here, what we've seen, what we've done, and how it's impacted our situation in Washington. And also talk a little about Snohomish County. So kind of a couple dates to keep in mind. Governor Inslee issued the stay-at-home order on March 23rd. And the whole idea of each of these measures, both closing the schools and then closing the restaurants and then the shutting down the state essentially, was to flatten the curve. And so this is what's happened since then. This is an epidemiological graph of daily COVID-19 cases in our state. It's from the Washington State Department of Health. The red arrow is approximately when that stay-at-home order was issued. And during the early days of March, we were seeing the number of cases in this early period of time was doubling every 2 to 3 days. So with 460 reported cases on March 12th, right now we could have nearly 2 million COVID-19 patients in the state of Washington if that doubling rate had continued. But I think what you can see is that doubling rate has certainly fallen off. And when you look at the cumulative cases, the idea is that you're trying to flatten the curve. So this first part of the curve, pretty steep acceleration. Now you can appreciate that the curve is getting flatter. It's not flat, but it's getting flatter. Now, this is the graph of the daily COVID-19 deaths, again, from the Washington State Department of Health. And again, we see March 23rd, and we're also seeing this numbers of deaths fall down. And in fact, we've seen a couple days where no deaths have been reported. Now, these were illnesses that began in the last week. So we may yet see some deaths populate these blank spots, but obviously this is great news. And we're waiting with anticipation for what Governor Inslee is going to say on Monday. And this is
Actually, he's going to be speaking at 2:30 today.
There we go. We're going to have an answer really soon. So, and this is the curve for deaths. And ultimately what we'd like to see again is that this curve flattens out and we don't see any more deaths from this. When we look at it from our county standpoint, this is the new cases of COVID reported in Snohomish County by date. You can see that this one is also decreasing. Our cumulative cases is also flattening out as well. So I think the take home message from this is that what we are doing appears to be working. And as we get our guard down and as we start our opening up our economy again, it's likely to resurge as we're no longer socially distancing as much. And in fact, this may be with us for a while. Some experts are indicating that it could be as long as 2 years. Even if we get a vaccine developed in a year, it may be even longer. But we know we can take measures to decrease our own risk. There's still a lot of unanswered questions, and we still don't have a cure. So remember that these are the things that you can do. Read it, learn it, live it, love it. So what do I see kind of happening? I mean, I don't have my crystal ball. In fact, they issue us a crystal ball when we graduate from medical school. However, there's no batteries. So these are the things that I think are not going to go away. I mean, you're still going to see plexiglass at Home Depot and QFC and Safeway. We're going to be anticipating social distancing for probably a good period of time. Smaller crowd sizes. Again, it's going to be really interesting to see what the governor suggests today with regards to crowd size. I think it may be a very long time before we see big stadium sports again. I think there's been an added benefit from telecommuting and teleconferencing. People are finding, hey, I can work from home and it still works. Obviously, there's been a great benefit from traffic. You're going to see masks. And then the last thing that's emerging are early detections of these things. So there's a number of different things they can look at to see if diseases are starting to emerge and then focus on that area. For example, there's a Bluetooth connected thermometer that when you use it, it anonymously uploads temperature data. So you can see clusters of increased temperature. Or Google search is an interesting one as well. People start searching for their symptoms, and that leads to an increased number of Google hits for fever or aches or something like that. So I appreciate the opportunity to come talk to you guys. I'm sorry I went over a little bit, a minute and 10 seconds right now. So these are some great resources. I put the websites for each of these sites in the chat window. So hopefully you can get that out. And again, I'll try to get this recorded and posted on the homepage, and perhaps you can get it on your own homepage as well. So with that, I'm not sure if we have time for questions or not.
Yeah, Bill, I think if we have a couple of quick questions, anybody go ahead, please.
Dr. Finley, this is Joe Marine. I have a question. So the early modeling that they had was way off, which is what they used to basically shut down the economy. How do you look at the comparison with Sweden, who didn't do that? They did social distancing, but they didn't shut down their economy at all, and they kept their schools open and their businesses open, and literally have very little difference with regard to their cases.
I think the big difference was their ability to, not socially distant, but contact tracing. And you've seen the same thing in Iceland. They've just very aggressively done contact tracing. And I think, quite honestly, it's a defect in our own health system, that we didn't have the access to testing, and we didn't have the access to the contact tracing tools. We didn't have those developed. I mean, South Korea rolled one out very early. There were a lot of people that were screaming about privacy issues, and they were able to nip it in the bud. Now, what they've seen is they've seen a surge, and I suspect Sweden's going to do the same thing. They're also going to see a surge. Look at the picture behind him. I also suspect that the cultural, the social democratic culture of Sweden is like, if you don't feel well, you don't go to work. And I think that's one of our big things that we fix in this country is like, if you feel like crap, stay home. Don't go infect other people. So I think those are other things that may be contributing to it. And the initial models, the kind of the model that I showed you was extreme. Those are just based on raw numbers. In fact, the institute down at the University of Washington has recently revised their numbers up. They've gone from 60,000 to over 70,000 deaths that they're anticipating in this country right now. So I think a lot of it's just going to remain to be seen. But I think they have different societies, different clusters. I mean, I think the biggest thing that impacted areas of urban density was urban density. I mean, you're in New York City walking on the street, you can't avoid people. And I think that this virus was that contagious that it could do it. So I think—
Bill, question for you. So are Georgia, Texas, Florida, these states that are kind of hurriedly reopening in different levels, I get, but aren't they asking for disaster and just reoccurrence of the COVID virus all over again?
I think they are. Really what they are is they're guinea pigs. And it's like one of those things where you don't want to be first. And I think, like, for example, Florida is already starting to resurge in deaths and cases because they opened up so early. And I think the same thing's going to follow. I mean, it's not as big a deal. I mean, it's still a big deal, but it's not as big a deal in your suburban and rural areas as it is in your cities. And I think the other thing too is that despite what somebody tells them about social distancing, I think people are still going to socially distance. I think you're still going to see empty restaurants. You're going to still see people doing all the things that they've avoided because they're afraid.
Yeah.
Hey, Bill, we had a question from
Bill,
Sheila. Oh, can I go real quick? If someone, Sheila asked via the text thread here, if someone lives with someone in the home, has symptoms, how long before another family member can go back to work after a negative test in so many days?
I don't know the exact answer to that question. As we know, that people can be asymptomatic. So presumably somebody, really what they were telling us initially, and I haven't seen any recommendations about this, is you really need to be asymptomatic for 2 weeks before you can go back. That's what they were advising us in healthcare before testing. But now with the test, if you have a negative test and you're asymptomatic, then you should be able to return to work. If you had a negative test and you're having symptoms, then really you need to wait a few days after your symptoms. I think the recommendation for symptoms is 4 days symptom free.
Thank you. Bill Lewis, did you have, oh, go ahead.
Bill Lewis. The governor of Michigan, not ours, but the governor of Michigan, had gone so far.
Oh, we lost you, Bill.
Uh-oh.
Any other question while we're waiting for get Bill back?
Yeah, I have a question on the remdesivir. Have you read that study, and how are they defining going from positive to negative? Is it the nasal swab or is it something else?
I think so. As far as from there's two of the remdesivir studies, the one out of China and then the one out of the United States. And I haven't read each study in depth. I've seen summaries of them. And I think we've kind of migrated from the nasopharyngeal swabs to nasal swabs. And in fact, there's some data suggesting saliva can test it as well. So I think obviously that makes it a lot easier to do the testing. I don't think I answered your question though.
Yeah, well, it kind of does, as long as you're still up on that side of the body. I think what we see when the coronaviruses is in general switch into the GI tract, that the head area goes negative, and then you get positives in the GI tract, which makes sense because that's where the virus is active at that time.
Right.
So it doesn't surprise me. Coronaviruses are typically 3 to 6 week viruses. They're not 2 week viruses. So it doesn't surprise me that we are having this, all of a sudden they're negative on nasal swab because it's switched to the GI tract, and then they get a positive literally on the backside, 5 weeks down the line. And I'm wondering, I'm concerned because I'd really like remdesivir to actually work. It makes sense to me that it would, but I think the way they've done the study, I'm worried that they're not actually in China. I've only read the Chinese study. I haven't read the American one. I'm worried that they haven't actually looked at where they need to assess efficacy,
They haven't. No, you're right. And in fact, the endpoints of their study were looking at resolution of symptoms and mortality. Those were kind of the two primary endpoints of the studies. But then, recently there was also, I don't know if anyone has seen this, there was some stuff coming out of the East Coast where they were doing studies on sewage systems, where they were sampling human waste essentially. And I think there was one in the Delaware County area where they identified an additional 15,000 cases of it.
Yeah, and I would say the number I heard on a telecon coming out of the Santa Clara Stanford study is 50. Yeah. So all of the worst case scenarios that you presented based on the antibodies, you can divide all those scary numbers by 50. And that, I think Joe was kind of hinting at that in his question. So that means that we've detected by PCR, someone going in the hospital, one person in 50 people. And keep in mind, that's in 4 counties in California. That may not be true for every region in the country, but that's what it looks like coming out of California.
Yeah, and the problem with the California studies is the way they selected patients. So they weren't truly random samples. So, I think that one of them, they used Facebook, and I can't remember what the other one was, but so that it kind of, until we get more pure random sampling studies, I think it's going to be, the jury's going to be out.
So you don't think the Santa Clara study was a random sampling? Is that what you just said?
That's my understanding. Yeah.
All right.
Okay, probably have time for one last question.
I saw Dave Poryubek had something maybe.
David?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Yeah, great presentation, Dr. Finley. Getting back to, I guess you mentioned Zika, and so it made me think of, the birth defects that are caused by Zika, and it's also an RNA virus. But I've done some reading, just preliminary. Do you have any comments with regard to follow-on birth defects with the coronavirus and COVID?
Yeah, nothing that I've seen. There have been a number of pregnant women that have had the coronavirus, and I don't think that they're seeing that at all. And the kind of thing with the Zika virus is that you essentially didn't have any symptoms, and it was manifest through birth defects. That's how they kind of identify it. So this one's kind of nothing that I'm aware of, fortunately.
The only preliminary results I've read about was that it is not causing birth defects, but it's so short term but that's good news if it's true. I guess so we have to wait and see. Okay, thank you.
Well, Dr. Bill, I want to thank you very, very much. This was extremely informative. I learned a lot just listening to you and kind of walking through all this. And thanks very much for taking time to join us. Again, Dr. Bill said his talk today can be found on the Everett Rotary site. And if you want to take another look at it and share it, that would be good. We can't be too educated on this stuff. So thank you again, and much appreciated. Rachel, thank you for the introduction. Rob, thanks for thought of the day. Mr. Straub, thanks every week for making this work. And
my pleasure.
Tell everybody to stay safe and stay healthy, and we'll talk again next Friday.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Great to see everybody.
Answer any questions if anyone else.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you.
He's holding on?
He might be, yeah.
Oh, Dr. Phil, are you holding on?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, great, because I actually have 10 questions.
You better get a drink, Dr. Finley.
Oh, yeah, I guess if there's no one else, or hi, Sean.
Hello there.
My understanding, I guess I'm trying to get clarity on illness reactivation. Do you think that's a real thing, a real phenomenon, or is that like an artifact of testing, the test not, or even the samples not being accurately obtained?
I don't think we know.
Don't know that?
I just don't think there's been enough of them to really kind of determine that. So.
Okay.
Yeah. Can I say something on that? Because we've talked about this like 3 times now in the PATH forum. We expect 10% of the population not to mount an appropriate immune response because they've got diabetes or they're on chemo, or these are human examples, but just even underlying hereditary disorders. So people will not, every single individual will not mount a correct immune response to this virus. It doesn't mean that the general population is at risk. So when people say they didn't mount an immune response, you don't have to internalize your family unless you have a high risk factor. And I think that's really important because I think that's a huge fear factor for people because they're worried that I'm going to get it and it's going to keep coming. And when is this going to end? And, that kind of thing. And it's really important to realize that absolutely there are some people that will not generate a proper immune response to this. They can get it again. They are at risk. That's your high risk population. And when you hear that, don't be afraid. Like, don't internalize that to your personal situation. Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, the only thing I would add, and I didn't mention in the thing, is if you look at the demographics of the distribution of the disease, I mean, it's mostly affecting people middle-aged, but in our state, the folks that are dying from this disease, 93% of them are over the age of 90. I'm sorry, over the age. So it's for example, my parents, I've got them squirreled away, and it's like, we're going and doing their grocery shopping for them. We're bringing them stuff, and it's driving them crazy. But it's just, it is so lethal. And they've got pre-existing diseases, and it's just, I think for that group of the population, until we have a vaccine, it's gonna They're going to have to be doing the social distancing and practicing all those, carrying in all those practices.
You cut out on the decade. Could you say it again?
Which one? The disease is mostly is in middle-aged, so people that are 30 to 50. But the people that are dying from this disease, over 90% of them are over the age of 60.
Yeah.
So in the state of Washington, we're not testing under 30s, right?
They still are. I mean, people are symptomatic and they're still being tested. Yeah. So when they present.
Yeah. So my daughter's significant other has asthma and is 24, and they would not test him. So yeah. So in other like Germany and Korea specifically, under 30s are 30% of the positive population.
I'm sure. Yeah.
We've got a artifact of sampling.
Yeah. Well, I think part of that had to do with the testing availability. So hopefully as that becomes more available, then it will become more readily, because it really helps inform you how aggressively you need to be isolated and quarantining yourself.
Can you speak to the antibody testing and any places that are doing research to try to go back and understand the evolution of it in our area? And I'm particularly interested because we're pretty sure my husband and I had it in the first week in February, which was rather early, but he traveled from SeaTac to Chicago right when everyone was passing through there and being funneled from China through those airports.
Well,
and in retrospect, now we recognize that.
We thought that we had the first death in the United States, and the state of California has gone back and
right. Yeah, I read that timeline and that informed me going, oh yeah.
I suspect that a lot of us who had those type of diseases in January and February may in fact have had it, which explains why they're seeing such a higher prevalence rate in the antibody testing.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of antibody tests out there, and some of them are not very good. The FDA kind of approved them kind of rapid fire. So I think until we really have a standard, it's probably not going to be really helpful. Because when you have a false positivity rate of 40%, it's just like, wow. So that means false positivity, meaning that you tested positive, but you never had it. And
right. Are there researchers who are trying to get at that information where it would be
absolutely
where you could connect with them? Because I'd like to offer to be part of that research if it would help.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately what we need random sampling of the population with a reliable test. And that's the only way we're really going to determine what the real prevalence is. But it's still going to be an estimate. I mean, I'm not going to test everybody. You're going to test a sample and extend it to the whole population. And it's probably going to vary too. Urban areas are going to have much higher incidence and prevalence versus rural areas, but it's going to get to those places. It's just a matter of time.
So how do you find those researchers?
I honestly don't know. I think right now it's not ready for prime time. I suspect the School of Public Health at University of Washington certainly will be conducting a lot of tests, and that might be a place to go. Looking for volunteers who might have had, but they're not going to necessarily always want people who had symptoms. They're going to want a random sample. They find that information out to find out, for people who had cold-like symptoms, what's the prevalence that they were seeing? How about people who are asymptomatic? What's the prevalence that they were seeing? So it'll be important, but that'd probably be the easiest place and most likely place to find something, looking for volunteers to participate in those studies.
Mm-hmm.
Sean, I guess if I can ask another one here. Dr. Finley, I guess we talked, at the end of your presentation, we talked about kind of moving forward. And this is a super complicated question, but maybe if you could, because we're gonna have another viral infection, we're gonna have another pandemic, and there's no way we can, in advance, develop a vaccine and develop drugs to something we know is coming, but we don't know what it is, exactly what it is. And so how do we position ourselves as society, as a country, as a world, to be in better shape to respond faster? I know it's.
I mean, I'm not in the intelligence, but I can say that hearing a lot of feedback. I'm hearing a lot of feedback. Can somebody mute? There we go. Oh, that's better. I think, certainly China was not forthcoming. They were not having a lot of transparency with the stuff that was happening earlier. With these global pandemics, you need a global response. And really, if you start seeing things that aren't there, it should be calling in a team of epidemiologists and infectious disease experts to come into an area to try to identify it. And then the other thing too is resource here in this country. I mean, we've been cutting funding to the CDC for years and years and years. I mean, we disbanded our epidemic team, you know, in the administrative branch. I mean, all of these things just remove the weapons from our tool belt to be able to fight this. We had a false start. The CDC sent out this defective test. There were delays in policies about being able to provide it. Interesting story. There's a woman, I think her name is Margaret Cho. She's an infectious disease researcher in Seattle at the University of Washington, and she was doing flu studies. And when this COVID thing started happening, they built a test and started testing for COVID. And in fact, they were the ones who identified the first COVID patient outside of the one that was admitted to Prov Everett in that Jackson High School student. So they basically did it. They found it fortuitously. And so, you know, you start seeing those things, and there's so much interaction. I mean, we are globally networked. I mean, we're a global economy, and there's so much travel, and travel's so easy. Any kind of infectious disease is going to spread like wildfire. And the big concern, we had the concern with SARS, and SARS was not as infectious, which is why it was able to be contained. MERS was nowhere near as infectious, but more deadly. And this one was just incredibly infectious. And having a global response to these things, having transparency from member countries to be able to get this information out and say, we need help, and making sure that we have the tools and the teams in place. You know, you talk about, you know, decreasing funding and all that sort of thing. You want to decrease funding until you don't have it anymore. And then when you want it, it's not there. So the fact that, and this has been going on for decades, the CDC has been getting their funding cut. You know, so of course that's what's going to happen. And, you know, had we had those tools in place, had China been more transparent about it, had we been much more effective in our you know, in the travel policy that was put in place when they did the travel restrictions from China, cat was out of the bag. I mean, the horse was out of the barn. It was already here. And it had nothing to do with people coming from China. And the European travel restrictions as well, same thing. And it's like, if you're gonna, and in fact, I had a colleague of mine was in Spain when they pulled in those travel restrictions. He was able to come home. And he stood in those lines. But guess what he had when he got home? He had coronavirus. And so, you know, a Spanish import. And so it's consistency. I mean, you can't, yeah, it's horrible that Americans are stranded overseas, but guess what? They're going to be just as likely to bring disease as someone from that country. So having measures in place to quarantine, to isolate, you know, the pictures of people coming back from Europe after that travel ban went into effect were embarrassing. It's like they were just crowded like sardines. They were so unprepared. And part of that is just simply resources. If you want to have those tools in place, you have to pay for them. And so I think we have reaped what we sowed with regards to resource utilization, budgeting, and developing those systems. I tried not to be too political there.
Did well.
Can I add just one thing to that? We had the first case in the end of January, the first death in the first week of February, and the CDC hit the ground here. And I know because I have a friend from vet school who was in the team who came into Seattle the second week of March, and the scientists in the CDC were trying to get in here. They wanted to be here. They knew what was going on. They've been trying since that first week of February, and they were not allowed to come here. Yeah. They can't just go. They have to be given directives. And so there was absolutely an admin serious problem in the head of the CDC. I mean, it's slightly appalling. And, I appreciate you try to keep politics out of it. So.
Well, and this is not,
that's a fact.
It isn't. I mean, it's not a political issue. I mean, it's a public health issue. I mean, that shouldn't matter if it's what your political affiliations are, what your skin color is. But, in fact, there are some racial disparities, and, maybe those racial disparities are a proxy for access to healthcare. There are some gender disparities. There's more men that are dying from this than women. It's just, but it doesn't care what your political affiliation is. The virus just doesn't give a damn. And it's so frustrating to see people try to politicize this. And it's just like, come on, guys, this has nothing to do with politics. But we do need to dedicate the resources to prevent this from happening again. And it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And do we want to be prepared for the next time this happens? And I would say, based upon what's happened, the incredible impact this has had on our economy. I mean, we're talking, the legislative, the past 4 acts that have responded to this is $3 trillion. I mean, that's more than the entire I don't know, the federal tax revenues for a year. I mean, it's just ridiculous how big this impact has been. It seems like, an ounce of prevention would have perhaps saved a pound of cure. And, other countries have done really well and have done much better than us. And there's some others that haven't. And, our areas have just been, New York City is just New Orleans, Atlanta is going to be devastated. It's just tragic, the kind of things that are happening.
Any other questions, guys and girls? Cool. We thank you so much for your time and your presentation today. Oh,
thanks, Dr.
Can I hear
Finley.
someone?
Is it possible to get Dr. Finley's email to email any more questions, or is that?
Dave, why don't you go ahead and ask a question, hey?
I think Dr. Finley might have to go. I don't want to presume anything here.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'm not going to put my email address on the webpage of the Rotary, but
no.
We'll get it to you, Dave.
Okay. Yeah.
And Dr. Finley, one last question. So do you row?
I did, yes.
Okay.
She's admiring the picture on your wall behind you.
Yeah, very much so.
Bernie Weber, yes, absolutely.
Yes, love Bernie. So,
yeah, my daughter rowed for 5 years.
Okay. Great sport. Yeah.
Actually, back to science a little bit. Is that the coronaviruses are common. We've known about them for decades. Okay, so is it crazy to think about people who have mild COVID disease? Is it crazy to think that perhaps some of these people have developed a partial immune response to coronaviruses in general, partial immunity, such that participates in this mild versus severe disease?
It certainly could. Yeah, it certainly could. Is there any cross protection with previous exposure to coronavirus? I mean, we know that from the H1N1 pandemic in 2009 that there are a bunch of elderly folks, and whether or not they were actually exposed to that exact virus or something that was similar, there certainly could be, but that will probably be teased out over time. But right now, there's no answer for that.
Okay, and when you talked about vaccines and you talked about 330 million people and 330 million doses, and I guess that is sort of that's a bottom line. I mean, is it possible we have to vaccinate people more than once to get a decent immune response, so that when you scale this up in terms of vaccine doses, scaling drugs, scaling vaccines, scaling anything is a monstrous task to do it well, And so it's almost like identifying the vaccine that works, and then actually getting enough of it to be effective in the near term. There's another daunting task here that we face. And so this talk about getting herd immunity through vaccination quickly it's just asking, that's like asking for a Christmas present here that we're not going to get.
Well, in fact, there was one of the production facilities for the flu vaccine was shut down in Pennsylvania, and I think it was because of the COVID outbreak. It was like, how about that for irony? Yeah. And, it also mutates. I mean, the flu, some years the flu is better than others, depending upon what they do it based upon predictive models. And they're also producing, they're not producing enough to vaccinate everybody. I mean, not even close. Because there's a certain demand. And, people are kind of reluctant to get the flu vaccine too. And it's like, as a healthcare worker, I have to get it. I either do that or I wear a mask the entire flu season. So I choose to get it. And my family does too because of what I do. So it is very daunting. There's no question about it. I mean, there's a certain percentage of the population that are immunocompromised and they can't be vaccinated. So they're relying on everybody else to get themselves vaccinated so that they're protected. I mean, that's like the measles, same thing. So I think it is going to be something that will come around again. It'll probably circle the globe. It'll come back seasonally would be my guess, but we just don't know. I mean, SARS is still out there. MERS is still out there. It's waiting for a mutation that makes it much more contagious to spread. And those viruses, I mean, gosh, SARS I think has a 30% mortality rate. MERS has a 50% mortality rate. So I mean, those are lethal viruses. And it's just, it's, like I said, I mean, our evolution we had coevolution with viruses. I mean, we have viral DNA that's embedded in us, viral sequences that are embedded in our genome. So, I mean, we've been living with viruses for hundreds of thousands of, if not millions of years, and probably millions of years. So, it is daunting though. You're right. And not only are you talking about 330 million people in the United States, but you're also talking about 7 billion across the globe. So, I mean, gosh, how do you scale up something that big? Lots and lots of challenges for sure. I mean, fortunately, I guess the one thing we do have is this drug remdesivir seems to be somewhat effective in the same way that Tamiflu is. It shortens the duration of symptoms, and it's cheap, but right now it hasn't really shown a huge effect. I mean,
how much, what's the price difference between that and Tamiflu? Are they comparable?
I don't think so. I think Tamiflu is pretty expensive.
Oh, is it? Okay, interesting.
People justify using it because I want to get back to work, right? So I'm losing more money by not working than I am by buying the Tamiflu. And when remdesivir, I mean, supposedly, or I saw a study today saying that the cost of production is about $1, and that includes money for Gilead, profit and that sort of thing, and development costs. And that's $1 for a 9-day course. But I mean, when it comes to market, I mean, gosh, they have a drug called Truvada, which prevents the transmission of HIV. That one costs probably $10 to produce a month's supply, and they charge
whatever they can.
That's a whole nother subject, isn't it?
It is. I've got a little can of worms here to open up. So,
but I guess my take on this actually is in the short term, like HIV, we don't have a vaccine, but we have good drugs. Is that in the short term, probably it's these antivirals that are going to do more good. And yeah, we need better agents than this initial agent, but that'll probably have the biggest impact aside from social distancing and care and all those other important things. But in terms of comparing vaccine versus drugs, short term, it's going to be drugs, and maybe vaccine is going to help down the road.
Yeah, and so far there's not much on the drug front that's helping. I mean, hydroxychloroquine, chloroquine, bust, remdesivir, a little bit. So and it's tough. I mean, until we find something. And in the initial phases, they were throwing everything at these people, and it just wasn't making an impact. I mean, we're starting to see people get through this now. But it's the pathophysiology of this is a very strange disease. It's, how it attacks the lungs, and nobody's really quite sure the actual damage it causes to the body. So, I mean, we call people when they come in, there's actually, there's two different phenotypes of the disease. And one of the phenotypes is these people, we call them the hypoxic well. So our oxygen saturation in our blood right now, 92, 94, 96%. So these people are blue and their oxygen saturation's in the 60s, and they're talking to you. They feel a little breath, which is really unusual. So there's some theories that the virus may attack the hemoglobin molecule and change its ability to bind to oxygen, but nobody's really quite sure. So I think there's going to be some, novel drug that they'll find that helps, but right now they really don't have one.
Yeah, there's an article out in Blood on that.
Yeah.
On heme binding, yeah.
Yeah, it's really, there was actually an article, I guess, probably about 2 months ago, and it was these molecular informaticists from China, and they modeled the proteins of the virus, and they compared it to hemoglobin, and it looked like it had some binding ability. And so they said it changed the conformation, can no longer bind oxygen. So that was the issue. And if you can't bind oxygen, your hemoglobin, I mean, you deliver oxygen and you die. So,
which makes so much sense because the ventilators don't work, right?
They don't. I mean, you put people on it, and our goal when we put somebody on a ventilator is that we get their oxygen level up. And the way that we increase their oxygen level is by turning up the percentage of oxygen. Oxygen is actually, ironically, toxic to the lungs. And then we also increase the pressure. So we try to shove the oxygen into the blood. The problem with that is that when we increase the pressure, it damages the lungs. And so you get into this vicious cycle of causing lung injury, trying to get the oxygen levels up.
Yeah, you can't fix a hemoglobin issue with a ventilator or a lung issue, right?
Nope. And that's what they're facing. So
right, exactly.
Would that hemoglobin factor play into it all? Why the young seem to be more resistant to this? I mean, I just think, what is it about them that's having them, you know, not get it in the same levels that olders are?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly could be. I mean, we just don't know. I mean, it's not like blood types have changed, like hemoglobin's changed, it's still the same, but there's some other factors that they have that are preventing them from developing the kind of symptoms. That's what we don't know. I mean, we don't know why some people are asymptomatic and others die. And in, you know, one of the things that there's some differences in outcomes based upon what blood type you are. So if you're blood type's O, you actually have a little better chance of outcome than if you're an AB type blood type.
Interesting.
Which makes sense with the hemoglobin binding. So but
that's really interesting.
Yeah, no, it is kind of crazy. I mean, it's just very bizarre.
There's another relationship, isn't it, with the ACE inhibitors in the story?
Hey, Sean, if you want to drop off, I'm happy to take over as host again.
I don't mind. This is kind of interesting. I'm enjoying it too.
I think it was the Institutes of Health or the NIH came out with some guidelines on drugs to use. And basically what their guidelines were, don't do anything. So if someone's on an ACE inhibitor before they come in, don't stop it. If someone's on an ACE inhibitor, don't start it. If someone's on steroids, continue it. If someone's not on steroids, don't give them steroids. All these medications, it's like, you know, you just supportive care. And maybe remdesivir helps and maybe it doesn't. So there's still ongoing clinical trials. If you're on remdesivir in the hospital, you're on a clinical trial. I mean, they're just not giving it. Now, interesting, when we first started seeing COVID patients at Providence, we put some people on remdesivir based upon compassionate care because there was nothing else. And that was probably mid-March, early March. And so in that period of time, I mean, I think this is one of the things that has been impressive is the number of clinical trials that have been spun up in a very short period of time. It's been impressive. And so pretty much everyone who's in the ICU who has COVID is on a clinical trial.
Wow.
So it's, you know, it's kind of it's a lot of work, yeoman's work, and trying to get all this stuff going. But it seems to be, from that standpoint, we're collecting a lot of data, but it's just going to take a long time to analyze the data. And, you know, like I said, I mean, public health officials have been strapped, you know, they've been hamstrung. They're not given all their tools because of budgetary constraints. So.
And you're right, yeah, without it being a red or blue issue, and going down that rat hole again, is that over decades here, the amount of funding for public health is just simply dropped off. And so how can we be in a position to deal with this? So it'll no question be, it seems like the dominant discussion with regard to the next election, that we can't be in this same place again. So I guess I partly I want to believe that's the case, that's going to drive this discussion so that we do fund this better. Of course, interest always wanes, you know, and then, but if this is what it takes, this is what it takes to get attention to it.
Well, and I think from the standpoint of you know, trying to predict the future, I think, you know, I mentioned that during the talk. I think it's gonna be a long time before we see major sporting events with large crowds, you know, until we have a mechanism. So I think, you know, frankly, the baseball season's gone. And in fact, I have a friend who's he's a scout. He's for the Arizona Diamondbacks, and they were talking. You know, Major League Baseball owners were talking about, you know, spinning up the season without crowds. But obviously, in order to do that, you have to quarantine the teams. They can't see their families. They have to get tested frequently. And then once one gets it, it's spread everywhere. So basically, the union said, not interested. You know, it's just like, until you guys get a better plan, the players union. So they pushed back against it. Although I did see NASCAR is going to start up here. They're doing 7 races in 10 days. I don't know if they're going to have crowds there. I'm assuming they're not going to have crowds, but go NASCAR.
Did you just maybe, I don't know how many more questions, but there was an article in Forbes, man, maybe 2 weeks ago, and it was talking about the early days of the coronavirus response in Seattle specifically. And it was talking about UW and Providence, actually, Johns Hopkins, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. There's the group that Christine Gregoire is kind of leading. I think it's Challenge Seattle or something along those lines. And it was a super cool article about how all these Seattle area organizations and hospitals and professionals, the things they were doing to kind of try to get ahead of this in the early stages. It just reminded me of how thankful I feel to live in the Seattle area. And I'm sure you probably see that in your work and as you're working with other organizations through the community, that maybe we don't have an answer, but we're probably we're the tip of the sword sort of in this region as far as what we're doing and the things that we're accomplishing.
And I think, you know, the proof is in the pudding too. I mean, we have managed to flatten the curve better than any other state in the country, you know, that's had these surges. And I think a lot of it has to do with our tech industry for sure, because what they started doing is they even before the governor said anything about it, they were telling people to work from home. And so they were kind of encouraging the social distancing before it became a governor proclamation to socially distance. And you know, for this just adds another reason that I love living in this part of the country, is this, like, we're just very progressive thinking and about how we approach these types of things. And you know, for all that it's worth, I mean, the fact that you know, our leaders took a stand and said, listen, this is what we have to do. It kind of speaks volumes to the challenges of those kind of decisions, because we're shutting down our economy. We're clearly taking a huge hit. And you know, I always like to say, is the juice worth the squeeze? And I don't think we're ever going to know that. I mean, what would it have been like if we hadn't done these things and we continued to see it? I mean, I think if, you know, for example, in New York City, you know, that curve was just going up exponentially. And then, you know, they kind of then clamped down on the city and it shut it down. But, you know, I think it was the weekend before they started seeing that, the bars were packed and the nightclubs were packed. And so it's just, you know, spread like wildfire.
Yeah, the slope on the curve though is so misleading, because it's what that curve is a representation of the up ramp of the testing, right? Really, I mean, we know with the infectivity rate, assuming that, and what I heard, and do you know when they really think that it actually hit Washington? I mean, I know we had that first documented case on the 21st, but I was hearing that they were looking back and seeing it potentially even the second week of January.
I'm sure.
I haven't seen that in like a peer-reviewed source though.
Yeah, no, I'm sure, and I'm not sure if they're ever going to be able to tell. Is the other thing too. I mean, they're going to have to associate symptoms. And like, for example, hey, I was sick in December, haven't been sick since then, and I'm positive for coronavirus, but we don't know because we're also asymptomatic. So it's really hard to tease that out. So I don't think they're ever going to be able to do that. You know, they have gone back and reclassified some deaths, and I think what's really scary with that seasonal death variation curve that I showed from this Yale School of Public Health is how many additional deaths there have been. And so in fact, the additional deaths are twice, additional outside of the norm deaths is twice what were reported.
But that Yale statistic is taken after everybody went on lockdown, right? So how many of those are suicides? How many of those are the domestic violence increases, you know, which are up like threefold in some where people are actually looking at it. So I'm not, the other thing that's going to come out in like 5-6 years is how much damage did we actually do? And this is not political at all, but how much damage did we actually do with the economic sanctions and keeping people in the house?
Well,
yeah.
It's the indirect consequences of COVID.
Absolutely.
One of the things we talked about too is that, you know, we're seeing decreased admissions to the hospital. We're seeing less strokes. We're seeing less heart attacks. You can't tell me
that's not real.
You can't tell me those things aren't happening. I think people just aren't going to the hospital and they're dying at home. So, and regardless of how they're classified,
we have a cousin who works in the Kansas hospital, and she said they get paid for every COVID death they report. So they report every death as COVID, which skews that death number.
Yeah. Well, there's going to be a lot of skewing, but
where is that?
In Kansas.
That's really strange. Whatever happened to Kansas? It's a strange thing.
Well, we won't also say what political party they affiliate with, but you know, let it be known there.
But I think there's going to be a lot more deaths, and whether or not it was directly due to COVID or was an indirect consequence of COVID, it's still a COVID death. You know, because it wouldn't have happened otherwise. So even your domestic violence deaths and your suicides, they wouldn't have happened otherwise. So they were actually kind of classified as COVID-related deaths.
COVID associated, yeah, absolutely.
And you know, there's going to be books written about this. I'm sure there's going to be, you know, long lists of books written about this, and hopefully there Hopefully there won't be a sequel, but at least in my lifetime. But you know, there will be a sequel. It's just hopefully it's a long time.
So I have to say, this is my biggest fear. because it's going to come out that the mortality rate's down around 0.2, right? Because that's what they're seeing with the antibody testing. And so people are going to go and be like, we did all this and look what happened, and it wasn't really necessary. And then something like SARS is going to break, the original 2004 SARS is going to break, and people won't listen.
Yeah.
And you're going to have something like, if this thing actually had a mortality rate of 20 or 30% on it, everybody would have someone in their family dead right now.
Yeah.
And they're going to ignore it. And then there's going to be panic, and it's going to be 6 weeks in, and it's going to be too late.
Yeah.
That is my biggest fear, because they are still in China. They still have those markets open. The Chinese government said it was illegal. I mean, on the wildlife feeds, they're in there yelling at people, and people aren't listening, and they're absolutely open for business.
But I thought the virus came from a Chinese laboratory.
It did. I mean,
no.
come on, these wet markets are freaking laboratories. I mean, it's terrifying, you know?
It's interesting though too, because I saw somebody talk, there was a guy talking about what wet markets are in China, and a lot of wet markets are not dissimilar from what we have. You know, you've got live fish, you've got live crab, you've got live lobster, most of them. But then there are some that have exotic wildlife in them, and they've got dogs and cats and whatever else, you know, people can eat. So
they don't clean the table between animals when they butcher them. All day, it's the same table, whack, 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 whack.
Yeah.
It's wood.
Yeah. Like things are sinking in. Yeah, that poor little pangolin, I feel bad for him. So
yum.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so it's bad times. Yeah, my nephew's getting married in November, and I'm just like, you know, and this is going to surge again. I mean, in 2000, in the Spanish flu epidemic in the early 20th century, there were 3 surges, and the worst was the second one. There was a spring, there was a fall, there was another spring. And so, and in fact, you know, there they even demonstrated the cities that practiced the best isolation and distancing did the best. So I think it's going to be, it will be better prepared next time. You know, we'll instigate those things. But you know, the plexiglass isn't going to go away. And quite honestly, if I was a grocery store worker, I'd be very happy that the plexiglass is going to stay. You know, and all the things that we touch, and they're wiping them down now after we touch them. You know, we're being careful in the grocery stores, and you know, trying to avoid things. Be cautious about gloves. I'm not a big glove fan, because I think what it does is it just gives us a sense of relaxing. And really, what you should do is cleaning and sanitizing your hands. So
yeah, absolutely.
Wear your mask in the grocery store. That's my other message.
Well, so what makes me crazy in the produce section, when I go in, I try really not to even look at people at this point, because, you know, we put masks on and we leave the masks on, but everybody else is uncomfortable, or they put them on upside down, right? And so then they're really uncomfortable because they don't fit right. And so then they touch their nose, touch the tomatoes, touch the mask to fix the mask, touch the oranges. It makes me crazy. I can't be in a produce section.
One way. I think it's going to be kind of a social, it's going to be a social rule that's going to take a little bit of time, one way direction in the aisles. And I think the other rule that's going to happen aside from the mask, I mean, there's airlines now that are requiring people to wear masks. I'm assuming that at some point in time, stores are going to start asking the same thing. It's like, you don't have a choice. If you want to shop here,
like Costco.
Yeah. And then
Supplements does that already.
You touch, you buy. Please don't squeeze the avocados, because if you squeeze an avocado, it's yours, you know? You grab the produce and then putting it back. It's just like, and I think, you know, that's just going to be the way that it's going to be. Yeah, 9/11 changed our lives. We can't imagine things without TSA now, being at the airport. Now the lines are really short. I mean, we're right through. TSA is great right now. But I think we're going to have same societal changes that are going to be with us for a very long time. A very long time. Which is a serious, you know, I think it's a lesson. And I think I hope the lesson we take from this is that we need to be better prepared, and we need to devote the resources to that. And I love to say that, you know, there's no such thing as a libertarian in a crisis. You know, everybody wants small government until there's a crisis, and then suddenly like, I want big government. So it's just, there has to be a happy medium.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens with this contract tracing app. And if that actually gets adopted by, because just because you have it doesn't mean they have it, and then what's the point?
I'm on the board at the Y, and one of the things that we're talking about opening up our brand new facility, how tragic this has been, is that, you know, in order, we're going to have to limit numbers, and maybe what we do is we require everybody to have that app on their, they have to carry their smartphones with them in the facility, and you can't come in unless you are using that app. just because we have the ability to do contact tracing. So it's just like, ugh, you know, it's gonna be challenging. It's gonna be really challenging in what we do, and
Yep. Cool. Any more questions, everyone? Otherwise, maybe we'll wrap this up.
Well, thank you.
You had some fantastic questions.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And we'll make sure we grab your contact information so we can get it around to Dave and any others that might have follow-up questions.
You've got it. So happy to answer questions. So just no phishing scams. I asked no phishing scams.
No hate mail. Awesome. Well, thank you again so much. That was wonderful. And I hope everyone has a great weekend.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for everything you're doing. We appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. All right. Have a great one.
Thank you. Take care. I just got to figure out how to turn this off. Oh, there we go.